Hello, yes, hello, hi there. Yes, this is my channel. And no, this is not Michelangelo's David. This is actually the statue of David. Oh, but Michelangelo did sculpt David. No, he didn't. It was a completely different guy named David who sculpted David. Before we start the story, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all our new posts. Actually, never mind. Yeah, Michelangelo did sculpt David. This is David. Michelangelo is dead. Sorry for the confusion. It seems only fitting to talk about Michelangelo today because it's March, which means that if you're in the US, you have recently celebrated Pi Day. So you get it, math and art go together. Did you know one man painted a ceiling masterpiece, 70 feet high, alone, for 4 years? Michelangelo wasn't just an artist, he was a force of nature. From chiseling marble into gods to painting the heavens, his genius shaped the Renaissance and defined what art could be. Michelangelo was born in 1475. His father was an aristocrat and he wanted his son to have a respectable career in politics. So he sent Michelangelo to live with his family in Florence. Though Michelangelo had early training in the classics, including poetry and painting, it was his own artistic endeavors that he was most passionate about. When he was just 13 years old, he began attending a famous artist workshop where he trained under some of the best artists of the day. Soon he would show off his skills by creating a sculpture of the biblical hero David as a young boy. Michelangelo was known for his incredible talent, but it was also rumored that he had a bit of an explosive temper. Soon after finishing his David sculpture, Michelangelo made a huge mistake. He angered one of the most powerful families in Florence and he had to flee the city. At this point in his life, Michelangelo was just 24 years old. While living in Rome, Michelangelo was commissioned to sculpt an elaborate tomb for Pope Julius II. One of the sculptures he created for the tomb was called the Moses. Michelangelo poured everything he had into the sculpture, and when it was unveiled, it was immediately considered a masterpiece. Then came the Pieta. Although she had been sculpted in marble, the Virgin Mary's flowing robes looked so natural that people thought Michelangelo had actually cast them in plaster. Michelangelo's genius was obvious to all who saw his work, and soon he was offered the chance to sculpt anything he wanted from whatever block of marble he chose. Michelangelo wandered around the marble yard looking for the perfect block until he found one that was so flawed it was considered worthless by everyone else. Everyone but Michelangelo. He saw the potential in the misshapen rock and took it upon himself to sculpt the biblical hero David. Some say that Michelangelo identified with the story of David because, like the young shepherd turned warrior, he too had risen to prominence after coming from humble beginnings. Michelangelo's David became a symbol of courage, youth, and Florentine pride. But while Michelangelo may have been able to effortlessly transform hard marble into smooth masterpieces, when it came to painting, he wasn't so sure of his abilities. In 1508, Pope Julius II offered Michelangelo a job. He wanted the ceiling of the newly completed Sistine Chapel to be painted. Michelangelo hated the idea. "I was made for painting," he lamented to a friend. "I can do sculpture, but as for painting, I know nothing about it." Of course, he eventually caved and accepted the gig. Even though it meant he'd have to move from Florence to Rome, he moved and he got to work. The problem was, Michelangelo wasn't used to painting on a large scale. His Sistine Chapel project required him to create nearly 300 figures on a ceiling that was almost 120 feet long. There was no room for error, but making mistakes was exactly what happened. The first few panels weren't well received. After showing them to a friend, he destroyed them in a fit of rage. When he calmed down, he decided to try again. Working alone, standing on scaffolding, tilting his head back, far from the ground, Michelangelo painstakingly recreated the scenes from Genesis. The prophet Isaiah predicted the coming of Christ, the Annunciation, the fall of man, and the creation of Adam. The prophets are among the most dynamic figures on the ceiling, their skin wrinkled and stretched taut over their bony frames. Their clothing folds drape heavily over their bodies, weighing them down, yet they rise upward toward heaven, eager to spread God's word. Angels have soft, rounded limbs, delicate wings, and they float effortlessly through the air. The human figures seem stiff and awkward in comparison. With their contorted poses and bulging muscles, the figures twist and turn on the ceiling. It looks as though they're tumbling end over end, competing in a race to reach the heavens. To make things more difficult for himself, Michelangelo insisted on painting directly on the wet plaster, which took him 4 years to complete. He worked feverishly, often 12 hours a day, and slept right there in the chapel. During his 4 years of labor, he developed a terrible hunchback. As he aged, his eyesight began to fail him, and many of his paintings contained mistakes. Still, his contemporary, the artist and architect Bramante, raved about the beauty of the ceiling, claiming that the chapel couldn't hold all of its beauty. And it's no surprise the chapel couldn't contain the beauty of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Nearly 500 years later, visitors still flock from all over the world to see it for themselves. To help preserve the frescoes, the Vatican museums open the chapel to the public only 4 times a year during the winter months. The heat from the crowds helped keep the moisture in the walls and prevent the paintings from cracking. But today, new technology has helped extend the season so that more than 6 million people each year can marvel at Michelangelo's art. After finishing the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo finished the tomb of Pope Julius II. The project took 8 years and included a total of 40 sculptures. 40. His Moses was considered a masterpiece, and the entire tomb was praised as the crown of the Roman ornaments. When the next pope died, Pope Clement VII, asked Michelangelo to create a monument for him, but the artist declined. By this point, Michelangelo was tired of sculpting and didn't want to take on another big project. Instead, he recommended a young artist named Francis, whom he'd taken under his wing, and offered to pay for the tomb out of his own pocket. Around this time, Michelangelo also completed the statue of the dying slave and the rebellious slave, both of which were originally intended for the tomb of Pope Clement. It was during this period that Michelangelo took up residence in the Laurentian Library in the Medici Palace in Florence. He lived here until his death in 1564. When Michelangelo passed away, he was buried in the Basilica di Santa Croce, but his remains were transferred to the Basilica di San Lorenzo in 1799. During his lifetime, he was revered by the general public. In fact, when he died, Italians across the country believed he must have been divine. When news of his death reached Venice, the bells of St. Mark's Basilica tolled. For much of his last decade, Michelangelo was in charge of sculpting and designing the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The enormous dome stands 98 feet tall and is the second largest in the world. It has become one of the most recognizable landmarks in Europe. Michelangelo's genius changed the world of art. His ability to observe the world around him and capture the human form at rest and in motion left viewers in awe. Although he struggled with painting, his Sistine Chapel ceiling is one of the most recognized works of art in the world. His marble sculptures are breathtaking and unforgettable, from broken marble to immortal art. Michelangelo taught us that genius isn't born, it's carved, painted, and earned. If you're inspired by great minds like Michelangelo, Galileo, Newton, and more, subscribe to our channel and explore the world through genius eyes. Hi, it's me again. You can also check out our other videos like this one, where we talked about some ways that math shows up in nature. I think you'll like it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all our new posts.